EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion here on EWTN. This program is just for you if you're a non-Catholic. That's right. If you've got questions about the Catholic faith and you're not quite sure where to get those answers, well, we're here for you. And here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're listening to us outside of North America, and we do have listeners literally all over the world, you would dial the number 1 and then 205-271-2985. You can also shoot us an email if you prefer that. The address ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. Charles Beery is our producer. Matt Kabinski is our phone screener. Jeff Burson handles social media for us. If you have a question that you would like to ask via YouTube or Facebook, we're streaming there right now. Just put your question in the comments box. Jeff will see it, and he'll send it to us here in the studio, and we will take it from there. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
I'm very well. Happy Valentine's Day to you.
Yes, happy somewhat unknown anonymous Roman Martyrs Day.
Yeah, apparently there were a number of holy people, including martyrs, a number of martyrs named Valentine.
Yes, yes.
Which I believe was the main reason why the Pope back in the day, which I guess was Paul VI, removed St. Valentine from the official calendar, I think.
Poor guy.
Something like that.
Getting kicked off the calendar.
Well,
you know.
There's always chocolate.
There you go.
We're going to lead off today with a call that came in overnight via our EWTN listener comment line.
Annie, Kansas City. I was trying to call to communion. Question for Dr. Anders. I work with a gal who is interested in the Catholic faith because her grandma is Catholic, and she mentioned the other day that she so respected Muslims that are willing to die like bees when they sting to put their life on the line. And I just looked at her and I said, yeah. So what would be the argument from a Christian Catholic perspective that Catholics are martyrs, but for the right reason, not terrorism martyrs and things like that?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So you're right to point out a difference between the Catholic ideal of martyrdom and the Muslim ideal of martyrdom. In Islam, of course, there's very much a sense that you can expand the House of Islam through militaristic conquest, and that a person who dies in battle to promote militarily the expansion of Islam. There are other categories as well, but that's sort of a paradigm case of martyrdom. And that's extremely different from the Catholic idea, which is that, martyr typically is someone who is passively killed, someone who refuses to renounce their faith. Let's say, for example, Christians in Egypt who were overrun by Muslims, who demanded that the inhabitants conform to Islam or die, and Christians who refused to give up their Christian faith and were put to death by those Muslim invaders would be martyrs in the Christian sense. And so it's the difference between say the nonviolence of the civil rights movement when Martin Luther King said we're going to oppose injustice, but we're not going to lift a finger against anybody. We're going to offer our lives up and our property and our freedom to defend our neighbors and the dignity of the human person. And it's the motive is entirely different. There's a different conception of the human person and what is the good of a human person and the dignity of a human person, that I'm not going to seek to impose my view of the world on you. I'll offer it to you by invitation and through loving relationship, but I'm going to respect the dignity of your conscience.
There you go. Thanks so much for your late night phone call. We'll get to our live calls in just a moment here. We'll kick off with Kevin and then Mark. But first of all, a quick email from Barry. If the angels are already saints, why does the Bible say we will judge angels?
They're not all saints. There's a significant number of them, about a third, I think, in fact, that went the other way.
That's true. So
there you have it.
So that's where we're going to leave that. And then this one here from Tony in Cincinnati. How could one respond to the suggestion that Christianity or Catholicism is simply a conspiracy?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so let's talk about what a conspiracy is. So normally when people talk about a conspiracy, what they have in mind is a kind of secret cabal, a group of people that has organized in order to acquire power through some fraudulent or deceptive means. And the idea is that, there's institutions and organizations that on the face may appear to be benevolent, but underneath they really house this malevolent intent to manipulate, to control. And so the idea that the Christian faith is of that nature, that, sort of the benevolent face of the Catholic Church and its institutions of benevolence and hospitals and schools and this kind of thing, really house this secret cabal, whose goal is world domination or something. Well, if that's the view, I'd say that the Catholic Church is one of the worst and most unsuccessful conspiracies in the history of the human race, right? Because when I look around at civil society in the world today, explicit Catholic political influence seems to be all but non-existent. And I mean, culturally, to be sure, that's the case. We have some Catholic politicians and court justices and so forth. But clearly, the United States is not in the grip of a tyrannical Catholic power that's controlling everything.
No,
not by a long shot, right? Nor Europe either. And I would say, so are there individuals in the history of the Church who may very well have sought to use the institutions of the Church for their own political or ideological aggrandizement? Well, I think that's beyond question. Absolutely, of course, there have been corrupt individuals that have done that. But those interests have been highly particular and not allied to a single ideological agenda, right? So you'll find Catholics who seek to exploit the Church for conservative political goals, for liberal political goals, for imperialist goals, for anti-imperialist goals. I mean, you'll find them sort of all over the spectrum of human history down through the centuries. And we have the record of some of these in history, Catholics going to war with Catholics and bringing the Church into the equation. But it's not a sort of consistent motif. It's all just the happenstance of historical contingency and individuals thrown about in a big maelstrom. I got more to say on this topic, but here comes the music, so maybe I'll let it ride there.
There you go. Appreciate that. Thank you so much for your question. In a moment, we'll get to Kevin in Titusville, Florida, listening on the Great Divine Mercy Radio. Also, Mark, a first-time caller from New Orleans. 2 lines open for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Call to communion on this Tuesday afternoon on EWTN.
Tomorrow morning on the Sunrise Morning Show.
We'll celebrate the feast of St. Claude de la Colombière and discuss his role in promoting devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. We'll also talk faith and fitness with Dr. Kevin Vost and catch up with canon lawyer Father Philip Michael Tangora. Plus all the latest news, weather, sports, and everything you need to start your day.
The Sunrise Morning Show, tomorrow at 6 a.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
This is Life Issues with Brad Mattis, president of Life Issues Institute.
While last in Washington, D.C., I was with a group of pro-life leaders who prayed at the Supreme Court on what would have been the 50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. We prayed and laid flowers at the steps of this iconic building. Fathers of aborted babies were the center of my prayer. Mark Repke spoke. His conception involved rape. This gentle man, known more for his behind-the-scenes efforts, shared what was on his heart. The circumstances of my conception do not determine my worth as a human being. Mark added, I could have been medical waste, disposed of by Planned Parenthood, or sold to somebody for medical research. Instead, Mark's birth mother chose adoption, and Mark's had a wonderful life. He's now moving hearts with his eloquent words.
For more information, visit our website at lifeissues.org and stay informed, more informed than you've ever been.
It's called to communion here on EWTN. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, we are here for you. That number 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. One of my favorite uses of alliteration is the phrase EWTN Media Missionaries. Who are these wonderful folks? Well, media missionaries for EWTN take EWTN to parishes and the community through the print and electronic media that we provide. You can help EWTN share the good news by becoming a media missionary yourself. Visit EWTNmissionaries.com today. Join us in sharing the eternal word with the world. There's plenty of work out there. All you have to do is, look at the news and you can say, you know what? We need more people to understand the Catholic faith. We need more people to understand the good news of Jesus Christ. The work is there. All we have to do is hear from you. EWTNmissionaries.com. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin today with Kevin in Titusville, Florida, listening on Divine Mercy Radio. Hello, Kevin. What's on your mind today, sir?
Yes. Hello, Dr. David Anderson. What I'm calling about is my son who passed away of a drug overdose last April 29th.
Kevin, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry.
I have questions about how to deal with my younger son and my daughter. He's in the middle. Casey was 31 years old, and he was Kevin Christopher. I'm Kevin Gerald. So to put a circle around the story and try to be brief, because I tend to ramble on. I was brought up a cradle Catholic, went to St. Thomas Aquinas grade school, beautiful church and school, Dallas, Texas, Immaculate Heart of Mary Church in Atlanta, Georgia, where later on, before I went in the Navy, I saw Mary in the clouds. I had my own apparition. We prayed the Rosary all our life, the Eucharist, and the Blessed Virgin Mary. My devotion to Mary has gotten me through just the hardest of times, and everything that I've ever accomplished, my Navy career, a career at the Space Center, getting through drugs and alcohol. I have 7 years, 1 month, 3 weeks, and 6 days clean and sober. And every time I come back from my AA meeting, very often in Melbourne, even though that's 40 miles south of here, I turn on at 11 o'clock the replay of your show. And that's where I got hooked up. And I just love, as so many other people have said, your eloquence and obviously God-given gift to all of us who, so many of us don't even know anything about the Catholic Church. But backing up a little bit, my children all went through the sacrament. I have been married twice and divorced twice. Their mother divorced me, so there were a lot of years where my children didn't have me around. And I'm sure that had a lot to do with it. It was hard enough for me and my mom and my dad and I being saintly women, a man and woman, just wonderful, having 10 children, that I had enough trouble that way. And then I know my children had enough trouble when their mom and dad divorced, if you follow me. So
yeah.
Here I have...
So if I could summarize here, Kevin, your son passed away. We are so sorry about this. Your whole family is reeling because of this. Your daughter and your other son have now, you feel, they have lost their faith because of this death. And so what do you tell those children?
Yeah, I want to say, first of all, I am so unbelievably sorry for your loss. My heart is just breaking for you, and I'm at a loss for words. What can I say to console someone on the loss of their child? There's hardly anything more horrible. So you really have my deepest, deepest, deepest sympathy, and I wish I could be present with you and not just on the radio and sit with you and befriend you and suffer with you and let you know that how much I mean what I'm saying. I myself have not lost a child in this way. I have experienced some pretty earth-shattering tragedies, and I know it. Well, I don't know what it's like for a child to die. I do know what it's like to suffer personal loss and family trauma to such an extent that I have no words and no comfort and no sense of who God is in this, or what my place is in the Christian faith even, or how my faith is meant to console me, or is it meant to console me in the midst of such unutterable sorrow. That I do have some familiarity with. And, what I can tell you I can tell you what has spoken to me is that this sense of crushing alienation, loss, darkness, confusion, I find expressed in the pages of sacred Scripture. When I turn to the Bible, I do not find a book that promises me an answer for every question or a balm for every wound. Far from it. I find instead passages like this from the psalmist. I am overwhelmed with troubles, and my life draws near to death. I'm counted among those who go down to the pit. I'm like one without strength. I'm set apart with the dead, like the slain who lie in the grave, whom you remember no more, and who are cut off from your care. That is a man in the depths of sorrow.
Yeah.
And that's in sacred Scripture. That's inspired prayer. And you know the book of Job. Job experienced horrific loss. And there were those around him who sought to console him with words, to explain the ways of God to him, and to tell him why it all made sense. And when God finally shows up at the end of the book, he turns to Job, who has accused God, and said Job is righteous, and turns to Job's would-be comforters, who would have offered him explanation, and said, you are not righteous. There's a point in our faith where we fall silent before the mystery of evil and the mystery of suffering and, honestly, the mystery of God. And rather than verbal answers, rather than formula, what has made the greatest difference to me in my life in times like this are charitable, loving Catholics who don't pretend to have the answer, but who instead determine to be the answer by their quiet, patient, empathetic listening and presence to me in the depths of my sorrow. So what I would offer to you from my own experience is with your own children, it is much less important to give them an explanation for why this happened, and far more important to be the face of God's mercy to them. And I would encourage you, getting grief support.
Yeah.
Get counseling. And maybe even, in some circles with people who have experienced similar losses, groups like Al-Anon or the Parents of Addicted Loved Ones, there are many people who have experienced similar things, and you may find some help.
Kevin, please know that we will keep your entire family in our prayers. Thank you so much for your call. That does open a line for you, though, at 833-288-EWTN. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, 833-288-3986. Call to communion here on EWTN. Going now to Mark in New Orleans, a first-time caller listening on the great Catholic Community Radio. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today, sir?
Hi, first-time caller, Dr. David Anders.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm trying to compose myself.
Okay, that's okay, Mark.
After that call, Dr. Anders, you hit my target. You hit my target. I have a similar. Well, first of all, you're a gem to this radio station. You're a gem to folks who have fallen away and folks who fail to see the beauty of our faith. You're a gem.
I appreciate that.
Because this gift that you have, this eloquence that the caller before me, it's beyond words. It's divine. It hits the target so many times in my day, and so many times in my life. So,
well, how can I help you today, Mark?
Okay. I have a friend of mine, fallen away Catholic, who's gone through some grave, grave things in his life. He's turned to me for counsel, and in some ways, with other people, I have the sacraments to fall back to. But I don't know. I don't want to alienate him, and I don't think I would. But I want to have counsel for him in a Catholic sense. But I don't want to alienate him. So what is your advice to me?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So, the Catholic position is that that grace perfects nature, it doesn't destroy it. And so when I hear that there's someone who is in need of counsel, I presume that there is a human problem there for which counsel is needed. And prudence and wisdom and virtue, I think, would demand that I can offer that person the best counsel if I inform myself most prudently about the concrete circumstances of their life. So, for example, I have no idea what your friend's issue was. We just had a call from a family that had been ravaged by the horror of addiction. I would not presume to give advice on the subject of addiction unless I felt like I had adequately informed myself through serious, assiduous study of addiction, and I had consulted experts, and I had read books, and I had taken counsel, and I had really informed myself so that I was qualified to speak into that problem.
Something like that, you cannot shoot from the hip.
You can't shoot from the hip. Now, it could be addiction, it could be terminal illness, it could be the loss of a loved one, it could be, need for a job or whatever. And my piety does not make me an expert in all things, right? My Catholic faith may inflame me with charity, but charity has to be informed by all of the virtues and the practice of prudent and rational decision-making. And so if I don't know anything, then all I can do is be an empathetic listener and an encourager. If I really want to give concrete, specific advice, then I've got to let nature and grace work together. I've got to let reason and faith collaborate with one another, and really, really seek out the integral good of that person, and not simply offer them pious platitudes.
Appreciate your call, Mark. David knows that I just returned from 10 days in Australia, which is not much time to spend there. My wife is spending a couple extra weeks visiting family. We have something like 36 family members there. None of them are Catholic. They've all fallen away from the faith. It was their grandmother who was the rock in that family. And, it's really tough to know what to say and what not to say. And sometimes you can come on and you think you're saying something gentle, but they perceive it as like, oh, here comes King Kong beating me over the head with a Bible. I've changed a lot on this over the years. And when I was a younger man, especially before I was Catholic, I looked on every social interaction as an opportunity to make a convert. Now I'm much more inclined to look on interactions as an opportunity to make a friend. Yeah.
And, I've known a lot of people that I've been in a relationship in my life have become Catholic, at least in part through my influence. But in no case was it because I sought to make them Catholic. It was because I loved them. And, I wear my Catholicism on my shirt sleeve, so to speak. And so you can't be in a relationship with me and not know something about my Catholic faith. And
sure.
It happened organically in the context of genuine, human, loving relationship. And I didn't have an agenda and I didn't have a timeline.
Mark, thanks again for your call. Here's an email from Carol. Carol says, the meditation, God has made man so that man can become God. I heard this meditation today. It always disturbs me. I don't believe it's true. Am I wrong?
Hate to tell you, you're wrong.
Okay.
This is a biblical teaching, right? 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 4 says that through the promises of Christ, we become participants in the divine nature. And so the deification of the human race is the end of the incarnation. But the trick is, what does that mean? And some people get confused because they assume, well, does that mean that I ascend to heaven in some sort of apotheosis like Hercules from Greek mythology or something? Or does it mean that I get sucked into the monistic, pantheistic reality of Brahma? I mean, like these seem to be pagan ideas with nothing in common with the personal God of the Christian faith. And of course, that neither one of those is what's in view. What's intended here is that humanity was made in the likeness and image of God, and that that image was wounded through the fall of Adam, and that through the incarnation, we regain in Christ what we lost in Adam, namely to be in that likeness and image of God. And because Christ himself is incarnate God, as we're remade in the image of Christ, we reflect the glory of God in our own character. And it's mainly a moral renovation and the union of the human person with God in charity, in the reformation of his will. It doesn't mean that we're subsumed within the monistic reality of the Godhead.
Carol, we hope that settles things for you, clears things up at any rate. Thank you so much for your email. In a moment, we'll be talking with Janice, a first-time caller from Brunswick, Georgia. Also, Mark, checking in from... No, we just spoke with Mark. Mark, God bless you, my friend. We have a couple of lines open for you at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Call to communion on this Tuesday afternoon here on EWTN.
God might not always like to bless us with health, wealth, and prosperity, but one thing He seems to enjoy lavishing on us is opportunities for trust. He's always been that way with the people He loves. He brings us into impossible situations so He can show us that He is the Savior. He did that with Moses. I know an army's behind you, Moses. I know there's a sea in front of you. Just keep running toward it. I'm going to do something really cool. Are you in an impossible situation right now? Is your marriage overwhelming? Finances on rocky ground? Boss being a jerk? Friends failing you? You know, when you're at the end of your rope, you're at the beginning of God's rope. Handle your problems with prayer. We have a God who acts when we ask. And when we turn to Him with trust, we'll find that the greatest blessing He gives us in our trials is a soul that walks through life with a peace that surpasses understanding. This is Chris Stefanik from reallifecatholic.com on EWTN Radio.
Called to Communion is on YouTube. Search YouTube to find the EWTN YouTube channel, so you'll never miss an episode of our show or any of your favorite EWTN radio shows.
The EWTN home video highlight for February is The Message of Lourdes. Experience the full story in this EWTN original docudrama and feel as though you are there alongside Bernadette, witnessing the miracles that will change her destiny and impact the fate of the world. Order your DVD at EWTNRC.com, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or call 1-800-854-6316.
If given the chance, who would you like to apologize to?
We'll talk about that tomorrow on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie.
Now back to Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
So what's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? Let's talk about that here on EWTN's Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders. A couple of lines open for you at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Janice is a first-time caller checking in from Brunswick, Georgia. And Janice is listening on Sirius XM Channel 130. Hey, Janice, what's on your mind today?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay. I have two children, adult children, who have left me, so to speak, me and my husband. We have helped them so much over the years through divorces and financial issues and let them come and live with us many times. And we've always been kind and generous with them. And for some reason, they're distancing themselves from us, and we feel, my husband and I, that they're ungrateful and being hateful. And as a Catholic Christian, I'm not sure how I'm supposed to react to this, or, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel. I know you can't help how you feel. I've been taught that over the many years, but that's where I am right at this point.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question, and I'm really, really sorry. I mean, this is a really painful situation to be in. I mean, it really is very painful. And I've got 5 children at various degrees of emotional proximity or remove, and we've certainly had our ups and downs over the years, so I have some appreciation for your experiences. I think your husband's analysis is probably correct. Sounds to me like they're ungrateful.
Yep.
Christian charity and prudence do not demand that you make yourself, into a doormat. You don't have to set yourself up for abuse. And justice is giving somebody what is their due, and that's not everything that they ask for, right? When it comes to I can't help how I feel, I think that's true in the short run. I think in the long run, trying to curate and manage our emotions is a major part of the spiritual life. And we are not merely the victims or slaves of our emotional life. And there are a lot of practical tools that we can use to kind of get on top of that. From secular tools like cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, to religious exhortations like we find in the letters of St. Paul, who says, whatever you do, think about whatever is good and noble and true and beautiful. Think about these things and you won't go wrong. We can definitely, the whole life of contemplation is about directing our attention to things that edify and draw us closer to God and the love of neighbor, not dwelling on things that would that would embitter us or make us resentful or feel saddened or feel lost and so forth. So there are things that we can do. There is a point, I think, in my own experience of parenthood, in keeping an open door, because you do care about your children, and there may come a time when they turn around and they come back and they say, I realize I've wronged you, and I'm sorry, and I'd like to be reconciled, and you don't want to burn that bridge, but neither do you want to keep, as Jesus put it, casting pearls before swine.
Yeah.
So you're not alone. This is unfortunately a common experience among people with grown children. I'm not the relationship coach on EWTN. We got a lot of other people that are qualified to do that. The Pop Checks and Dr. Garindy.
Sure.
And I would really recommend that Dr. Ray says that this is the most common call he gets. Well, generally speaking, older Catholics who want to know how to handle their wayward children, their wayward adult children, is the most common problem that he encounters, and you'll hear a lot of it on his show.
Sure.
So for more practical advice that's outside my purview, I really would recommend tune in to the Pop Checks and Dr. Ray, who deal with this kind of thing all the time.
Janice, thanks so much for your call. Here's an email from a concerned mama, because she's signed, sincerely, a concerned mama. Anyway, she says, my son was baptized last fall at an evangelical covenant church. When administering the baptism, the pastor said, we baptize you rather than I baptize you. I have been concerned about the baptism's validity ever since, but I've been struggling to get a sufficient answer regarding rebaptism. Should I have my son baptized again using the proper language, or is the original baptism valid because the language of the Trinity was used appropriately? And is there a concern about being baptized twice? Thanks so much for any guidance you can provide. Sincerely, a concerned mama.
Okay, thanks, concerned mama. I appreciate the question. So I don't know how old the child is. That's one important factor here, as to whether or not this was an infant baptism or whether this person put themselves forward for baptism. But I'm going to assume, on the context of the question, that this is a child who is below the age of reason. All right. So this is the function. This is a childhood baptism. The parent is the one standing in, professing the faith vicariously for the child. That's the way I'm going to understand it. If I'm wrong about that, I'm sorry. We baptize is not a valid formula for baptism. It's not the formula given to us by Christ. I baptize you is the proper formula for validity. And so the church would not regard this as a valid baptism. There is no such thing as rebaptism. There is only absolute baptism or conditional baptism. And what happens is, if there's someone who's been validly baptized, that person cannot be baptized again. It's an impossibility, and it's against the law to attempt it. But a person is not validly baptized. To submit them to baptism is not to rebaptize them. It's just to get it right this time. It's not a second baptism. It's the only time you've done it right. Now, when there is a doubt, and this sometimes happens, if there's a sacrament that there's a doubt about validity, the church will perform what's called a conditional baptism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something like this. If this person is not baptized, then I baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So God knows whether the person was validly baptized or not. And this is a baptism only if this is the case, that this person was not validly baptized. So if this is an infant baptism or childhood baptism, and you have the authority to do this, and you can go to your Catholic priest and say, look, this person was baptized outside the church. I was there. They didn't use the church's formula. There's a serious doubt about validity. Can we do either an absolute or conditional baptism? You should probably get an affirmative answer. If you don't, you try the next priest at the next parish. Because, occasionally you will get priests who are, they're not sticklers about canon law, and they're kind of have a laissez-faire attitude, but that's not actually what the law of the church would demand in this case.
She used the term evangelical covenant church. Now, are you familiar with that?
That's like hamburger joint. That's very generic language.
Okay.
That could either refer to a denomination, or it could just refer to a very generic kind of Bible church.
Gotcha.
So I don't know which of that is.
Call to Communion here on EWTN. Couple of lines open for you at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Let's go to Marie now in Tennessee, listening on the EWTN app. Hello, Marie. What's on your mind today?
Hello. I just really wanted so much from the depths of my heart to speak to your earlier callers. And for those who are not Catholic, it still remains the same. My husband passed away very suddenly 1 year ago. 8 months before that, my adult son passed away very suddenly. And yes, it was from the horrible fentanyl thing. And he was in his 40s with a beautiful family. And right before these first holidays this year, my daughter's husband left her. So it's just her and me with basically 3 deaths right in a row. And I am not talking to you from a place of despair, because anyone in this boat needs to know you have people to whom you can go. You need to get counseling. You need to let the Lord come in. You need to not be alone, because it might feel like you're dying, but life goes on, whether you want it to or not. And I didn't want it to. I really didn't. But now I want it very much, because 1 year later, from my husband's death, after receiving the help of a wonderful counselor, the prayers of all the people around me, and not letting go of Christ, whether you're Catholic or not, hold on to him with everything you've got. And if you are Catholic, and even if you're not, go sit in a church, because you're sitting with him, and he will carry you.
Yeah, thanks, Marie. I appreciate it. And listen, my heart goes out to you on your. This is an incredible string of tragedies that hit your family.
Triple whammy.
That's a triple whammy. And I appreciate the encouragement, the exhortation to your fellow suffering Catholics. So thank you very much for calling.
This is why we do this show.
Yep.
One of many reasons. I'll give you a little inside Catholic baseball here. One thing that our producer Charles does every week is figure out what is going to be the best show to air as a best of over the weekend. This week, it's a slam dunk. we don't have to worry about it. It's only Tuesday. Charles already knows, well, this is the show. That's it, period. Call to Communion here on EWTN. Be sure to join us for EWTN Live coming up tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Eastern. Father Mitch welcomes author Joseph Pierce to talk about the 12 most important books ever written and how each work left its mark on the civilized world. Should be a great show tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Eastern, EWTN Live with Father Mitch and author Joseph Pierce right here on EWTN Radio. Question here now from, looks like Dolores, who says, why did St. Paul say that people that are married should stay married and people that are single should stay single. Or did he say that?
He did, in fact, say that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, because marriage is, in principle, indissoluble, and the celibate life is preferable.
Okay.
So if you're called into the Christian life and you're not married, Paul says, hey, if you can stay that way, you're better equipped to be of service to the church and to the Lord. But if you are married, you haven't done wrong, and you've pledged yourself to your spouse, and so you should stay in that situation. The only exception that Paul contemplates is when there is a convert from paganism whose pagan spouse refuses to stay in the marriage after the Christian spouse has become a Christian. Paul says in that instance, you're not bound.
Okay. And there you go. Thank you so much for your email. Here's one now from Linda. Linda says, my adult agnostic son has been asking questions lately about the possibility of God's existence. In our first discussion, he told me he believes there is an alien race of beings controlling the earth, but is willing to explore Christianity. He read Ezekiel 1 and views this passage as supporting his theory. Are you familiar with this alien race concept, and how do I explain the strange passages in Ezekiel 1? That's from Linda.
Yeah, thanks. So, what to say about the alien race controlling things theory? I hope that he has better evidence than the texts of Ezekiel. Basically, this strikes me as this is obviously a species of a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Because these aliens are certainly not evident. They're not evident. And evidence that may be alleged for them, I strongly suspect, is more plausibly explained in other terms. And I would imagine that someone who holds a theory like this probably hasn't been a very close student of history, because when you study history, you generally can dig down into the causal nexus of historical events and find very plausible explanations from economic, social, geographic, climatological, political, and intellectual, ideological contexts usually are sufficient. So, for example, when Luther began the Protestant Reformation and he published the 95 Theses in 1517, he gives us an account of his motivations and his thinking and his religious prehistory, and that seems perfectly adequate to account for posting the 95 Theses. And then when those theses were picked up and his subsequent polemical literature began to spread across Germany and France and England, and you read the court cases interviewing the early Lutherans across the continent and what they found attractive about Luther and how they employed that in their battle with, both with the church and with temporal authority, and the way it tended to kind of aggregate into certain social classes and demographic groups. Again, I think the sort of the political, ideological, economic circumstances provide a sufficient explanation, and the assertion or the position that aliens are somehow necessary, well, the alien hypothesis seems to me quite odious to those circumstances. And I think you could do the same thing with most episodes in human history. I can't really think of an episode of human history where the alien hypothesis becomes necessary, to explain what's going on, right? And I certainly don't think there's any direct evidence. So it doesn't strike me as a rational theory at all. How to explain Ezekiel's visions? Well, that's exactly what they were. They were visions. And they seem to have been quite imaginative. Now, the kinds of things that Ezekiel saw, honestly, I think they would probably fare quite well in the next Marvel superhero movie, right? Bizarre creatures with lots of eyes and wings and riding on fiery chariots and this kind of stuff. It's highly imaginative and fantastical stuff. And I don't think that as Catholics we need in any shape, form, or fashion to believe that these were, concrete, material, physical objects descending from heaven. They They were in the realm of imagination and fantasy, inspired imagination and fantasy, but imagination and fantasy nonetheless that had a profound symbolic significance to the prophet, and that's the way they've been interpreted in Catholic history.
Linda, thanks so much for your email. Call to Communion here on EWTN. Let's go to Doug now, a first-time caller from Holland, Michigan, listening on Sirius XM, Channel 130. Hey, Doug, what's on your mind today, sir?
My wife and I are in kind of a dilemma. I'm not sure if it's an important thing or not an important thing. Our children, of course, were born Catholic, raised Catholic, went through catechism, went to church with us all their childhood life. They became adults, so of course they all made their own decisions, and two had fell away. One now has we have a 2-year-old granddaughter with, and he was Catholic and went through, obviously our son went through the whole rigmarole with the catechism and everything, and was pretty good with it. But then he married a gal that didn't have a religion, a denomination, or church going. As a matter of fact, they weren't even married in the church. They had one of these online people that get the ordination on online. But what our concern is how important baptism is to a child. For instance, this 2-year-old granddaughter now of his that we've expressed if they had any notion of getting this child baptized or not. And at that point in time, my son said they were going to, but then that just kind of fell by the wayside like everything else. How important is it really for this child to be baptized? Or if it doesn't happen, is the old saying, all children go to heaven? Is this something that should be bothering us or looking at trying to...
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate the question, Doug. Thank you so much. So it's important, but its importance is different, I think, than the way you have construed it. It's not simply a matter of saying, well, if they're baptized, they go to heaven if they die, and if they don't get baptized, they don't go to heaven if they die. I don't think that's the right way to frame the question. Baptism is the rite of entrance into the church. And the church actually will not baptize a child unless there is a well-founded expectation that the child will be brought up in the faith. And so, baptism in the absence of the practice of the Catholic faith really doesn't do that much for you, right? Because you're going to offend again, as it were, unless you learn the faith and come up with all of the sacraments, and in the practice of the faith and the pursuit of virtues and the pursuit of a Christian life, baptism fits you for that life of Catholic practice and the pursuit of virtue and charity. But in the absence of the meaning of the Christian life as one of discipleship and following Christ and persevering to the end, and in the absence of that course of Christian life, baptism abstracted from the church is not going to get you to heaven, right? So should the children be baptized? Yes, but they should be baptized as the first step in living a Christian life. They should not be baptized if the view is, well, I'll just baptize them and then we'll just, keep on sitting at home, watching Netflix, right? That's not the purpose of baptism. Baptism is not a hellfire insurance policy. It is the first step in the Christian life within this thing that we call the Catholic Church. And so how does a grandparent handle this? Well, sometimes grandparents will call and they'll say, well, I snuck the kids out to the backyard and I emergency baptized them in the pool. Was that okay? No, that's not okay.
No.
You can't do that. You're not going to sneak them out the back door and do a secret baptism without mom and dad knowing. You're not going to do that. Here's what you can do. This you can do. Son, it looks to me like you're on the fence about baptizing the child. I understand. I don't want to impose anything on you, but I will make you an offer. If you will let me, I will take the child to the church. I will stand in. The church will baptize the child, and then I will take on the responsibility of bringing this child to Mass and saying that he or she receives religious instruction in the Catholic faith. I will do that so that the kid can live a Christian form of life, and no judgment. You will never hear me say you're doing a bad job. I will never tell you that you're a bad parent. I will never guilt trip you about bringing your kid to Mass. You do whatever you want to do. You live your life. You're a grown man. You've made your own choices. I respect you. But I'm making the offer to step in and be the Catholic presence in this child's life if you want. If you don't want, then I won't.
Yeah, and that may or may not work.
May or may not work.
There you go, Doug. Thanks so much for your call. Let's go to Scott now, our first-time caller in Fort Lauderdale. Scott, let's see here, is listening on Sirius XM as well. Scott, what's on your mind today?
Hi, guys. I want to just, first of all, thank you very much. I really enjoy listening to the show whenever I get the opportunity.
Thank you.
I'm currently in a discussion with some Protestant acquaintances, and it's coming up about the difference in the books of the Bible, what we have in Catholicism. And I seem to recall that Jesus quoted from a couple of the books that, as we'll say, Luther excluded, or no longer in what Protestant Bibles would have. And they're bringing up I'm drawing a blank on the name of the translation, the Greek Jewish text. But I don't think that's a good avenue for me to discuss because it's so esoteric. But maybe if I could at least point out if there were books that Jesus quoted from that are excluded from their Bibles to bring them around or thinking about it at least.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So here's what you need to do, I think, in my judgment. Here's how I would handle a discussion with Protestants about the biblical canon. I would ask this question: how do we know which books belong in the biblical canon? How do we know? How do we know? Has God revealed which books belong in the biblical canon? Not just the Old Testament, the whole thing. Protestants generally have a 66-book biblical canon. Did God reveal that list? Did he reveal the list? If God did not reveal the list, then of what authority is your list? Not the individual books within the list, but the list as a list. Does the list itself, does the table of contents possess divine authority? And if so, how? That's the question. That's the question. All these other questions are pedantic. Who quoted what? Which church father used this? These are pedantic questions. I mean, we can answer them and I can get into them. I mean, they're interesting historically. But they're beside the point. They're beside the point because, see, Jesus never quoted from the book of Jude. Never quoted from it. Okay, do we throw Jude out of the Bible? For that matter, Jesus never quoted from any book in the New Testament. So is Jesus quoting from a book the criterion of canonicity? If so, better throw out the whole New Testament. Jesus never quoted any passage of it.
True.
All right? And any other sort of ad hoc solution you come up with has this same character. Okay, well, Paul quoted from it. Well, Paul didn't quote Jude. Right? Well, Jude quoted from it. Jude quoted from nothing. Jude quoted from 1 Enoch, for crying out loud. Right? This is not a valid criterion. And you're pretty much left with one or maybe two or three options. You can take the Catholic position, which is to say we know which books are inspired and canonical because they've been handed down by sacred tradition. Now, I think that one has the strongest biblical support behind it as well, all right, as well as being like coherent and rational and objective. You can say, I know which books are canonical because God told me. You can plead your own subjective religious experience. Or you can go the R.C. Sproul route and say, I don't know which books are canonical. Some of them probably are. I don't have an infallible list of books. In which case, you're left never knowing whether the text you cite or read or study or reflect upon is divinely inspired or not. Now, what Christ gave the apostles as a rule of faith was to teach everything he had commanded, which was oral tradition, with a promise of divine assistance being with you to the end of the age. So I trust the tradition of Christ handed on in the Catholic Church as the infallible rule of faith and practice, including the faith in which texts should be considered canonical.
Scott, thanks for your call. Dr. David Anders, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Tom.
See you tomorrow here on EWTN's Call to Communion. Have a great day and God bless.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
More to